International students. I get a lot of questions about this, about how the NIL process works for international students. Is the process for them collecting a degree any different? I know the process for them collecting NIL money is different. I'm sure we could talk a long time about the stipulations thereof, but what's kind of an overview of how the situation is different for international students with collecting NIL money?
Yeah. Do you want me to comment to the NIL or their academics?
I guess first academics.
Okay. Yeah, I mean it's really no different than a domestic student athlete. The only exception would be if we're talking about a transfer who's coming from an international university, that just gets a little more complicated because every country's academic system, especially university level system, has different credit amounts that trigger full-time enrollment. And so, working with our international admissions to determine how many terms of full-time enrollment did they have at that previous institution, at that international university. That really is the hardest part. And you're oftentimes dealing with transcripts in a non-English transcripts and getting those translated. And so it's administratively challenging sometimes, but once you get past that part, it's no different than any domestic student athlete. And then to your question about the NIL and how it differs from domestic student athletes, we definitely identified that as a question when NIL first became permissible for our student athletes. And so we had done some work with a third-party immigration attorney, who's an expert in visas, just to make sure that we weren't putting our student athletes in a situation where they were potentially risking their F1 student visa status. And I would say, and this seems to be the emerging best practice across the country for international student athletes is so long as if we're talking about an active income NIL opportunity, meaning they're actively performing a service to receive that compensation, then the service provided is going to have to take place outside of the United States, just because there's such a hyper specific type of employment that students on an F1 visa can participate in that conforms with their F1 student visa while in the United States physically. There becomes a little more flexibility when you're performing that service outside the country, because then technically the F1 visa doesn't create the same restrictions as it would for someone who's physically in the United States. So that's how you've seen more and more international student athletes participate in NIL, is just performing work outside of the country. There are some passive income opportunities that international student athletes can participate in. It requires a lot of education on the student athletes, because a passive income opportunity means you're not doing anything to receive that money. So the best example that I have is you see a lot of schools with those group licensing agreements that's using the university marks on jerseys or t-shirts with their name and number. International student athletes, if they opt into that agreement while they're outside the country, and then do not promote the sale of their apparel products in any way moving forward, so like not having it on their social media profile, things like that, then that also becomes a permissible NIL activity and opportunity for them, because they're not actually providing any service or work performed at that point. They've really, opted in, take advantage of the opportunity being provided by the institution, and then are really just sitting back and allowing for that income to come in if there are apparel items sold with their name and number.